A single dad opens his door to a stranded soldier, never guessing she's a billionaire's disowned daughter, or that her goodbye will become something far more permanent. If stories of quiet love, redemption, and second chances move you, subscribe and stay a while. There are more like these to follow. Snow didn't fall so much as hushed everything. It swirled across the road in thick, weightless waves, wrapping fence posts and tree limbs like old silk bandages. Somewhere between the last turn and the broken-down mile marker, the soldier's truck gave a final cough and died. The heat vanished with it. No signal, no voices, just the engine's ticking silence and the wind clawing softly at the glass. She didn't curse. She just sat there, fingers still wrapped tight around the wheel, breath fogging the air in front of her face. Her name was Reese. At least, that's a name she kept, but she hadn't spoken aloud in 3 days. Not since the motel clerk 2 states back. Not since the last checkpoint she passed without looking back. A single porch light blinked somewhere in the distance, low and orange, like the last candle on a cake long forgotten. She shouldered her pack, tucked the photo deeper into her breast pocket, and stepped into the night. The house wasn't grand, not even close. Sagging eaves, peeling paint, and a rusted weather vane that hadn't spun in years. But it was alive. There was a heartbeat in the warmth spilling from the kitchen window. Laughter, faint and lopsided. A little girl's voice trailing through it like a ribbon in wind. She hesitated at the gate. It felt wrong, knocking on someone else's door at this hour. But the cold had begun to find her wrists and ankles, had started to whisper up her spine. The man who opened the door wore tired eyes and a flannel shirt half-tucked, a bit of flour on his sleeve. Behind him, the child peeked out, 6, maybe 7, holding a wooden spoon like a wand. He didn't ask who she was. He just said, "You lost?" She nodded once. "Truck. Died," she replied. He looked past her into the dark. "Come in before you do the same." That was how it began. She didn't tell him her last name. He didn't ask. He introduced himself as Caleb and the girl as Junie, who offered her a cookie with too much cinnamon and smiled like she gave them to every stranger who passed through. Reese tried not to sit too deep into the couch. Her boots dripped snow onto the old braided rug. The room smelled with smoke and something sweet, maybe apples baked in brown sugar, maybe just memory. Caleb brought her tea in a chipped blue mug. "No milk," he said. "We don't run fancy here." "I'm not fancy," she replied. He looked at her long enough to believe it. Junie crawled onto the armrest beside her, legs swinging. "Are you a cowboy?" Reese blinked. "No, ma'am. You have army boots. My daddy has those." Reese's mouth twitched. "I used to be a soldier." Junie considered that. "Did you ride horses?" "No," Reese said quietly. "But I learned how to leave places fast." Junie didn't seem to understand, and for that, Reese was quietly grateful. The fire popped. Outside, the snow layered itself over fences, over trees, over the memory of roads. Caleb stood near the window, watching. Not her, not exactly, just the way someone watches after loss, not waiting for rescue, but bracing for something worse. They didn't say much after that. Caleb offered her the guest room. She said she'd sleep on the couch. He didn't argue. She unrolled her bedroll anyway, too practiced to ask for more than she needed. But when she turned, Junie had returned with a blanket from her own bed, a pale green one with faded daisies. "I don't use it much," Junie said, even though Reese could tell that was a lie. "Thank you," Reese said. Junie's grin was all teeth. Then she disappeared up the stairs. Caleb lingered a moment longer. "Storm will pass by morning," he said. Reese nodded. "They usually do." He looked at her again, longer this time, as if trying to place a song from years ago. "You okay?" Reese shrugged, still breathing. He didn't press, just tapped the wall once before heading upstairs. The house settled into its night rhythm. Floorboards creaking, wind brushing against the siding, the occasional sleepy cough in the child's room. Reese lay there on the couch, staring at the ceiling where a water stain shaped vaguely, like a heart, had formed near the light fixture. From her duffel, she pulled out the photo. A woman in pearls and a boy with a smirk stood beside a man in a gray suit. Behind them, a towering white house she'd once called home, but never quite lived in. She stared at it for a long time, then turned it over. There was nothing written on the back. She folded it into quarters, slid it back into her jacket, and rolled to her side. At some point near dawn, she woke. Not from a nightmare. Those had stopped months ago, but from something quieter, a small weight being placed near her pillow. She opened her eyes to find Junie tiptoeing away. Reese reached up and found a folded sheet of paper. Crayon on printer paper. A drawing. 3 stick figures. One tall one with brown hair. One little girl with big eyes. One woman in green with black boots. She stared at it until her eyes burned. On the bottom, a scrawl. Hope you don't have to sleep in your car again. Reese laid back down, but didn't close her eyes. Not for a long time. Morning came slow, the kind that took its time to light the world again. The kitchen smelled like toast and eggs and something old and safe. She found herself holding the crayon drawing like it was a passport. Caleb looked up from the stove as she stepped in. "Hope you like fried," he said. "Don't remember the last time I had warm." He handed her a plate. "Welcome back to it." They didn't say grace. They just ate. But every now and then, their eyes met across the table, and something wordless passed between them, like the beginning of a long road. Outside, the snow had stopped, but neither of them seemed in any hurry to go. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the world draped in a hush so complete it made even the birds pause. A brittle crust of snow stretched across the fields, untouched except for a single winding line of boot prints leading from the porch to the old chicken coop and back again. Reese stood at the edge of the porch, steaming mug in her hand, watching the sun push reluctantly through a sky still soft with cloud. She didn't speak. She hadn't since breakfast, but she hadn't left either. Caleb came out with his jacket half-zipped, hair still damp from a rushed sink wash. He nodded toward the outbuildings, his breath curling in the cold. "Hinge on the barn doors come loose again. I'll need another set of hands." Reese looked at him over the rim of her mug. "You trust me not to run off with your livestock?" He gave a crooked half-smile. "If you do, promise you'll take the rooster." She set the mug down. "I'm in." They worked in rhythm, not from intimacy but from necessity. He held the door steady while she hammered the rusted pin back into place. Her sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing faint scars that caught the morning light like tiny roads branching across her forearms. Caleb didn't ask about them, but he noticed, and that was enough. When the barn door swung properly again, Reese leaned back against the wall, stretching the stiffness from her neck. "You always fix things before coffee?" "Just the ones I can't ignore." A soft rustle made them turn. Junie stood near the corner stall, arms wrapped around a faded plush rabbit, her boots on the wrong feet. "Miss Reese, do you want to help feed the goats?" Reese glanced at Caleb, who shrugged. "Your call." She took the grain bucket, without a word. The rest of the morning unraveled like thread, slow, quiet, and purposeful. Reese carried hay. Junie named every goat twice. Caleb chopped with the steady grace of a man who'd done it so often he could do it in his sleep. Every so often, his eyes would flick toward Reese, measuring, maybe, or memorizing, but never judging. At lunch, Reese stayed just long enough to eat half a sandwich, then disappeared without explanation. Caleb found her out by the old orchard, kneeling beneath a knotted apple tree stripped bare by winter. The snow crunched under his boots. That tree hasn't bloomed in 3 years. She didn't look up. Still standing, though. He leaned against the trunk beside her, arms crossed. The wind tugged at her hair, lifting stray strands like smoke. "You ever think about cutting it down?" she asked. He hesitated. "Sometimes." Then Junie taped a drawing to the trunk. Calls at her wishing tree. "I guess I'll let it stay for that." Reese exhaled slowly. "It's good, what you've got here." "Good doesn't mean easy." "No," she said. "It doesn't." He waited, but she didn't say more. That night, over leftover stew and butter bread, Junie announced she wanted to sleep in the living room again so Miss Reese wouldn't feel lonely. Reese, uncomfortable with the suggestion, but unwilling to refuse kindness, nodded once. "Only if you take the couch this time." Junie grinned. "Deal." They set up a pillow fort instead. By lamplight, Reese read from a tattered storybook with faded gold edges. Her voice was soft but steady, the kind of voice that made children believe in everything and adults wish they still could. Caleb watched from the hall, unseen. Later, as Reese cleaned the kitchen in slow, deliberate movements, Caleb lingered near the doorway. The silence was companionable. He cleared his throat. Most folks don't stick around past morning. She didn't turn. Most folks aren't offered a place to stay without a price. There's no price here. I know, she said. Then quieter, that's what makes it hard. He didn't push. Instead, he handed her a towel and began drying the plates. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing against the windows like a memory trying to return. 2 days passed. Then 3. Reese stayed. She didn't say why. She just woke early, fed the animals, helped Caleb clear snow from the south fence, and taught Junie how to braid rope. In the evenings, she would sit on the steps just outside the house, watching the last light fade over the hills like a curtain being drawn. Caleb joined her once, neither speaking for a long time. She broke the silence. "You ever leave this place?" "Once," he said. "Before Junie. I thought about staying gone. Then I got the call." "What happened?" "My wife," he said simply. "She was pregnant when I left. I wasn't ready. I told myself I needed to figure things out. When I finally came back, she was gone. Cancer. Fast. Her sister raised Junie until I could stand still long enough to hold her without shaking." Reese turned to him, something fragile moving behind her eyes. "You came back." He nodded. "I had to. I couldn't let her be the reason I stayed gone." The moon was high now, bathing the frost-covered fields in silver. Reese pulled her knees up, arms around them. "I left after my last tour. Didn't go back. Not even to collect a uniform." Caleb didn't reply. He just listened. "They said I should feel proud," she went on. "But I didn't. I felt invisible, like I'd returned in pieces, and no one wanted to name them. You don't need to name them here." Reese looked at him then, really looked. "That's what scares me." He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled off his gloves and handed her a folded envelope, postmarked that morning, addressed in a fine, swirling hand. She froze. Caleb had already started walking back toward the house. "It came while you were out with Junie," he called over his shoulder. Didn't mean to look, but the name stood out. She stood there a long while, the envelope heavy in her hands. Reese Ashcroft Harrington. The snow no longer crunched underfoot. It sighed. She didn't open the letter, just slipped it into her coat pocket and went inside. That night, she didn't join them for dinner. Caleb left a plate on the counter and said nothing. Junie climbed into bed with her plush rabbit and asked once, quietly, if Reese was sad. "Just tired," Reese whispered. Junie didn't ask again, but before falling asleep, she whispered toward the dark, "It's okay to cry. My daddy does sometimes." In the deep hours of night, Reese stood at the window of the guest room, staring out at the orchard. Her hand rested over the letter. Her breath fogged the glass, fading in slow, steady beats. When she finally turned away, she left a single fingerprint behind. By morning, the letter was gone from her coat, hidden, and the field sparkled again, new frost, new light, a world pretending it hadn't heard a thing. Mornings came softer now, not because winter had relented, it hadn't, but because the house had fallen into a rhythm, one shaped by quiet footsteps, shared coffee, and the barely audible hum of something trying to heal. Reese stayed. She didn't say how long, didn't give reasons. But each day she remained, her silence took on a different shape, not distance, but presence. Caleb no longer looked surprised when he found her out by the chicken coop before dawn. Sleeves rolled, breath fogging the cold air, her hands moving with the instinct of someone used to getting things done. Before questions could catch up, she worked like she'd always been there. She fixed the loose fence rail near the north pasture, rewired a faulty outlet in the pantry, and without a word, cleaned the soot from the fireplace bricks until the stone beneath looked almost new. She never announced what she was doing, just found things broken and mended them. Junie, meanwhile, had decided Reese was hers. She followed her like a shadow, mimicking how Reese tied her boots or rolled her sleeves or squinted into the wind like she could read the weather. In the evenings, they'd sit by the stove while Junie listed the names of stars she claimed she'd named herself. Reese listened, always listened, even when her eyes seemed far away. One morning, while Kayla was out checking fence lines, Reese found herself wandering the hallway upstairs. The door to the spare room was ajar. The sewing table sat under the window. Dust settled thick over its lid. Something about it tugged at her, the way old things sometimes call to soldiers, like memory recognizing its own kind. She opened the lid. Inside, the thread was tangled. The drawer jammed half shut. She tugged gently, then harder, until it gave a reluctant groan. A spool rolled out, along a folded strip of muslin cloth, soft, yellowed, unfinished. She didn't touch it, just studied the shape of care left behind. Her hands found tools without thinking. By the time Caleb returned, the drawer had been planed, reassembled, and oiled. Reese was threading a new bobbin when he stepped into the room. He didn't speak right away. Then that was hers. Reese looked up. I figured. She wanted to make Junie's baptism dress herself, he said, stepping closer, eyes on the table. Didn't finish it. Cancer took her too quick. Reese set the bobbin down carefully. I'm sorry. Caleb nodded once. You fixed it. I didn't mean... No, thank you. Neither said more, but the air between them shifted. Later that night, the wind knocked out the power. The house went still, then dark, except for faint ticking of Junie's bedside clock and the whisper of snow against the windows. Caleb lit 3 oil lamps. Reese struck matches with practiced ease. Together, they moved through the house as if they'd always done this. Checking rooms, tucking in corners, warming blankets near the stove. When it was done, they sat, just the two of them. Junie had already fallen asleep with her plush rabbit tucked beneath her chin. Reese stared into the lantern's glow. I used to like the dark. Overseas, it meant you could stop looking at what was broken. Caleb leaned back in his chair. Sometimes I wonder if I live out here to keep from seeing too much. Reese turned to him, the shadows carving her face into something both strong and fragile. You still see. You just don't say it. He didn't deny it. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of things neither had language for. Junie asked if I ever had a dad, Reese said after a while. And did you? She shrugged. Not one who stayed long enough to braid my hair. Caleb exhaled slowly. I didn't know how to braid until Junie was 4. YouTube saved me. That made her smile. A small one. The kind that hurts a little. Do you want to show me? She asked quietly. He blinked. You're serious? I haven't touched anyone's hair in years. Might be good to remember something that isn't about survival. Without a word, Caleb fetched Junie's doll and handed it to her. Reese cradled it like something sacred. Her hands moved slowly, clumsily at first, then with steadier confidence. Over, under, over, smooth and repeat. Caleb watched, not because he didn't trust her with the doll, but because watching her do something so gentle rewired something in him he hadn't known was broken. You've got the touch, he said. Reese didn't look up. I used to braid my bunkmate's hair before raids. Said it made her feel human. Caleb swallowed. Later, when Junie stirred and asked for water, Reese was the one who brought it. When the girl tugged on her sleeve and whispered, Can you braid my hair tomorrow? Reese didn't answer. She just nodded, gently. The next morning, she sat on the floor while Junie perched on a stool. Small fingers ran through soft strands, her voice listing stars again. Reese parted the hair and with trembling hands began to braid. Caleb watched from the doorway, holding a cup he didn't drink from. That afternoon, Reese stepped out for firewood and returned to find a familiar envelope on her pillow, the one she thought she'd hidden. Unopened. Beside it, a second note, Caleb's handwriting. Didn't read it. Figured it belonged where you'd feel safe enough to open it. Someday. She stared at the note, then at the envelope. She didn't open either. Just pressed both to her chest and stood very, very still. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat at the table, pen in hand, paper trembling. She began to write. Dear Mother, I'm not sorry. The words bled out like thawed frost. She wrote about choices, about walking away, about not fitting the mold with clean heels and pleases. She wrote about war and absence and the taste of ash. She wrote about finding shelter not in mansions, but in houses with worn rugs and sticky jam jars and children who give you drawings. She didn't finish. The page tore slightly when she crumpled it. She threw in the trash, too afraid of what it meant to send it, too afraid of what it might stir. But the next morning, when she returned from the barn, the paper was gone, folded, smooth, left on her pillow. The edges lined up, the crease flattened. She didn't ask, and Caleb didn't speak of it. But something between them, unspoken and quiet and undeniable, had been mended. Outside, the wind picked up, dragging with it the scent of thaw. Somewhere in the distance, a drip echoed, ice melting from the roof, the first sound of spring beneath winter's silence. Reese stood by the window, hand resting on the glass, watching the orchard, and she stayed. The frost had returned by the fifth morning, clinging to the porch rail like the hand of someone reluctant to say goodbye. The sun hadn't yet risen, but a faint lavender hue brushed the sky's edge, hinting at a day that hadn't decided whether it would be cruel or kind. Inside, the house was still. No coffee brewing. No child's footsteps padding across the upstairs floor. Only the kind of quiet that follows a departure. Caleb stepped into the kitchen barefoot, rubbing his chest where sleep had weighed heavy. Reese's boots were gone from Matt. Her duffel no longer leaned by the door. He didn't have to check the spare room to know. She left, not with noise or drama, just absence, the way she did most things, like the soft closing of a book someone had finally finished reading. Junie came down a few minutes later, her hair unbrushed, eyes wide and blinking. "Where's Reese?" Caleb crouched and pulled her close. "She had to go, sweetheart." "Why?" His throat tightened. "Some people, they don't know how to stay, even when they want to." Junie didn't cry, but she curled into his shoulder and stayed there longer than usual. Later, when Caleb returned to the guest room, half hoping he was wrong, that maybe she'd just gone out to the orchard or to walk the fence line, he saw it. A white envelope resting on the pillow, his name written in a careful, uncertain hand. He sat on the edge of the bed, opened it slowly. "Caleb, if I tried to say these words out loud, I'd leave too much unsaid. You offer me something I haven't had in years. Space to be a person, not a uniform. You didn't ask me to explain myself, and maybe that's why I found myself wanting to. You and Junie gave me more than shelter. You gave me proof that home doesn't have to be earned through perfection or bloodlines. It can be offered in silence, in the way someone sets an extra place at the table without asking why. I'm not the person my family raised. I'm not the soldier the papers once wrote about. I don't know exactly who I am yet, but I think I want to find out without hiding anymore. Thank you for seeing me. I left something for Junie, too. Tell her I never forgot her stars. Reese." Caleb sat for a long time after reading. The envelope trembled slightly in his hand. He set it down, folded neatly again, and picked up the smaller note Reese had tucked beneath it. A card drawn with watercolors. Soft swirls of blue and purple. Inside, a simple line in block letters. "You reminded me what home feels like." He found Junie in the living room, curled in a quilt, staring at the cold fireplace. "She left you something," he said gently. Junie looked at the card. Her bottom lip quivered. "She said she'd never forget your stars." Junie nodded slowly, hugged the card to her chest, and whispered, "You think she'll come back?" "I don't know," Caleb said truthfully. "But sometimes people come back when you least expect them." Weeks passed. The snow melted in streaks across the hills, revealing patches of grass like old photographs coming back into focus. The orchard bloomed, tentative blossoms, small and pale, as if afraid of being noticed. Caleb didn't speak of Reese often, but she was there, in the way Junie braided her own hair now, clumsy but determined, in the quiet moments when the house felt full, even if no one else had entered it. Then, one evening in early spring, Caleb stood on the porch watching the sun set low behind the fields. A rumble reached his ears, an engine, steady, familiar. A truck, dark green and clean but dusty around the tires, rolled up the drive and came to a stop near the fence. He didn't move. The door opened. Reese stepped out. She wasn't in uniform. She wore a soft gray sweater, Jeans, boots polished but worn. In one hand, a tray of cinnamon rolls covered in foil. In the other, a small overnight bag. She looked older and younger at once. Junie burst out the front door before Caleb could say a word. "Reese!" Reese laughed, soft and unguarded, and crouched just in time to catch the girl in her arms. "You came back," Junie said into her neck. "I promised I'd try," Reese whispered. Caleb watched them, hands still at his sides, breath caught somewhere between disbelief and gratitude. Reese stood, holding Junie's hand. "I left the war behind," she said, eyes on Caleb now. "If you'll still have me." He didn't answer at first, just stepped forward and reached into his pocket. From it, he pulled a single, folded page, the letter she'd once thrown away, the one she never finished. "You forgot this," he said. Her breath caught. She reached for it, then stopped. "You kept it?" "You left it." She looked down at the paper. Her eyes shimmered but didn't fall. "I thought I'd lost that part of me." "You didn't," he said. "It was just waiting for you to come home." Reese nodded, slowly, carefully, like someone saying yes to life for the first time in years. That night, they sat by the fire again, Reese, Junie, Caleb. No questions, no explanations, just cinnamon rolls and starlight and the quiet understanding of people who had nothing left to prove and everything left to live. Later, when Junie fell asleep with her head on Reese's lap, Caleb placed another log on the fire. The embers glowed deep and steady, like a heart that had stopped pretending it wasn't still beating. Reese glanced at him, a hint of that old guardedness still in her voice. "You think it's possible to start over?" He didn't answer right away, just leaned back and said, "I think the hardest part is realizing you already have." She smiled at that, and for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel like she was borrowing peace. She felt like she belonged to it. If this story touched you, subscribe or share where you're watching from. These stories matter.